There is a moment in every great story where trust dies, where the person standing next to you, the one who shared your fire and fought at your side, turns their blade on you. In the real world, betrayals are ugly and personal. In the universe of Warhammer 40,000, betrayals are apocalyptic. They crack open planets, they shatter legions, they kill gods, and they echo for 10,000 years. The galaxy of the 41st millennium is a place defined by one simple, horrible truth. The people you love the most are the ones most capable of destroying you. And nobody in this setting learned that lesson harder than the Emperor of Mankind and his 20 sons, the Primarchs. These were not ordinary men. They were demigods, built from the Emperor's own genetic material, enhanced with power stolen from the warp itself. They were the greatest warriors, the finest generals, and the most brilliant minds humanity had ever produced. They were made to conquer the galaxy and build a new golden age for the human species. Instead, half of them turned traitor. Brothers killed brothers. Sons turned on their father. Legions that had bled together for decades suddenly pointed their guns at each other. And the Imperium, that vast and magnificent dream of unity, burned. But the Horus heresy was not one single act of treachery. It was a cascade, a chain reaction of broken trust, poisoned faith, and shattered bonds that stretched across centuries and light years. Some of these betrayals were the work of scheming manipulators who spent decades laying their traps. Others were the result of a single terrible moment where everything went wrong at once. And a few were so complicated that even 10,000 years later, nobody can agree on who actually betrayed whom. So today, we are going to walk through the 10 most heartbreaking betrayals in Warhammer 40,000. Not just the biggest or the most famous, but the ones that cut the deepest. The ones where the knife came from someone who should have been holding a shield. We are starting at number 1 and counting all the way up to 10, because in a galaxy this dark, there is no shortage of broken promises. Let us begin. Number 1. Horus turning to chaos. The Emperor's most trusted son became the arch-traitor. If you know anything about Warhammer 40k, you know this name. Horus Lupercal, the War Master, the brightest star in the Emperor's constellation of suns, and the one whose fall would drag half the galaxy into darkness. Understanding why this betrayal sits at the top of our list requires understanding just how close Horus and the Emperor actually were. Because this was not just a general turning against his commander. This was a son destroying his father, and the wound it left has never healed. Horus was the first Primarch to be found. His gestation pod had landed on the world of Chthoniya, a blasted and ruined mining planet that sat close enough to the Sol system that the Emperor's expanding forces discovered him relatively early in the Great Crusade. Unlike most of his brothers, who grew up on their respective worlds for years or even decades before being found, Horus was recovered quickly and brought back to Terra. Chthoniya had shaped him, certainly. He had grown up among gangs, fighting for scraps, learning to be cunning and opportunistic, and hungry for approval. But those years in the hives were brief compared to what came next. And then, something happened that never happened with any other Primarch. The Emperor spent time with him. Real, significant, extended time. For over 30 years, Horus was the only son at his father's side. He trained with the Emperor. He fought beside the Emperor. He learned statecraft and strategy, and the 1,000 complicated arts of building an empire from the greatest mind in human history. They saved each other's lives on the battlefield more than once, most famously during the wars against the massive Orc Empire of Ulanor, where Horus personally rescued the Emperor from a particularly dangerous war boss. During those 3 decades, Horus became more than a general. He became the Emperor's right hand, his confidant, his favored child, and everyone in the Imperium knew it. The bond between Horus and his father was the most important relationship in the entire Great Crusade, and it was visible to everyone. The other Primarchs saw it. The mortal soldiers and administrators saw it. The remembrancers who documented the Crusade's history saw it and wrote about it. When the other Primarchs were found one by one on their scattered worlds, each of them had to deal with the fact that Horus already had a relationship with their father that they could never match. He had been there first. He had earned something that none of them could ever fully replicate, no matter how many worlds they conquered or how many enemies they destroyed. And Horus knew it. He wore that favored status like armor, and it made him confident, charismatic, and deeply effective as a leader. Other Primarchs might have been better fighters or better strategists in specific areas, but Horus was the complete package. He understood every facet of warfare. He could plan, react, and improvise against any threat. He was a strong combatant in his own right, and more importantly, he was the perfect right-hand man. He could talk to anyone. He could manage egos that would have shattered lesser men. He could make his brothers feel valued even when he was giving them orders. But that favored status was also a trap, because at the conclusion of the Ullanor Crusade, the Emperor did something that would change everything. He named Horus Warmaster, the supreme commander of all Imperial military forces, second only to the Emperor himself. It was the greatest honor any of the Primarchs had ever received. Horus was now officially in charge of the entire Great Crusade, and then the Emperor left. He went back to Terra to work on a secret project that he refused to explain to anyone, not even Horus. He established a Council of Terra made up of mortal civilians to govern the Imperium, effectively sidelining the Primarchs from political power. And he told Horus to finish the Great Crusade without him. No explanation, no timeline. No indication of when or if he would return to the front lines. For a man whose entire identity was built on being the Emperor's favorite, on being close to his father, on earning approval through service and excellence, this was devastating. Horus felt abandoned. Worse, he felt replaced. The mortals on the Council of Terra were now running the empire that the Primarchs had bled to build. And the Emperor had not even bothered to explain why he was leaving. Some of the other Primarchs took it in stride. Rogal Dorn went with the Emperor to fortify the Imperial Palace. Robout Guilliman kept building his empire in Ultramar, but Horus could not let it go. That resentment sat inside him like a hot coal, burning quietly, but never going out. And the forces of chaos knew exactly how to fan it into a flame. The scheme to corrupt Horus was orchestrated primarily by two individuals working in concert over the course of decades. The first was Lorgar Aurelian, the Primarch of the Word-Bearers Legion, who had already fallen to chaos worship after the Emperor humiliated him for treating the imperial truth as a religion. We will discuss Lorgar in much more detail later. The second was Erebus, the First Chaplain of the Word-Bearers, who was arguably the single most dangerous and hateful individual in the entire heresy. Erebus was a true believer in chaos, patient and methodical, and he had been working to undermine the Imperium from within for longer than anyone suspected. During the Great Crusade, the Lunar Wolves and the Word-Bearers had jointly conquered a feral world called Davin. The people of Davin were organized into warrior lodges, tribal structures built around the veneration of local predators. The Lodge of the Bear, the Lodge of the Hawk, the Lodge of the Serpent, and others like them governed the social and religious lives of the Davinite people. What nobody in the Imperium realized at the time was that these lodges were secretly connected to the worship of the Chaos Gods. The Davinites were cultists, and their warrior lodge traditions were rituals of devotion to the ruinous powers. Erebus recognized the value of these secretive structures immediately. He encouraged the adoption of warrior lodges within the Lunar Wolves, and eventually spread them to other legions as well. These lodges became hidden networks of influence within the Space Marine legions, operating outside the normal chain of command. They were places where Marines could gather in private, share grievances, and discuss ideas that would not be acceptable in the open command structure of their legions. They were the perfect breeding ground for corruption, and that was exactly what Erebus intended them to be. 60 years after Davin was brought into Imperial compliance, Erebus set his trap. He had previously stolen a Xenos artifact called the Kenabrak Anaphame from a human civilization called the Interrex. This was a cursed blade, a weapon that had been dedicated to Nurgle, the chaos god of disease and decay. Erebus arranged for the Lunar Wolves, now renamed the Sons of Horus in honor of their Primarch's new title, to return to Davin under the pretense that the planetary governor, Eugen Temba, had gone renegade on Davin's moon. He gave the anathema to Temba, knowing that Horus would come personally. His pride would not allow anything less. On the surface of Davin's moon, Horus confronted Temba, who had been transformed into a bloated, plague-ridden servant of Nurgle. In the fighting, Temba wounded Horus with the anathema. The blade carried a supernatural toxin that the sons of Horus's best apothecaries could not cure, no matter what advanced Imperial technology they threw at it. Every remedy failed. Every attempt at treatment was useless. The wound was killing Horus, and there was nothing anyone could do about it through conventional means. Horus was dying, and that was when Erebus made his move. He convinced the officers of the Sons of Horus's warrior lodge, who were desperate to save their beloved Primarch, to take Horus to the Temple of the Serpent Lodge on Davin. He told them it was a house of healing, a place where the local priests could cure what Imperial medicine could not. In truth, it was a chaos temple. The Serpent Lodge was an octagonal stone building set inside a massive crater, and its innermost chamber contained a sacrificial circle and sinkhole built for the specific purpose of channeling the power of the warp. It was here that Erebus performed rituals that sent Horus's spirit into the Imperium. Inside the warp, Erebus disguised himself as Hastur Sejanus, one of Horus's closest friends who had been killed earlier in the campaign. He showed Horus visions of the future. The Chaos Gods showed him the Imperium of the 41st millennium, a decaying, superstitious, violent regime where the Emperor was worshipped as a god, and the Primarchs were either forgotten or remembered only as mythical figures. They showed him cathedrals dedicated to the master of mankind. They showed him a humanity that had abandoned science and reason in favor of blind faith and ignorance. And they told him that this was the Emperor's plan all along, that the Primarchs were always meant to be disposable, that the Emperor had always intended to discard his sons once they had served their purpose, and take the worship of humanity for himself. The visions were carefully crafted half-truths. The most effective lies always are. They showed what the Imperium would become accurately enough, because the Chaos Gods could see the future, and they knew what was coming. But they left out the most important part, the fact that Horus's own rebellion was the cause of the decay he was being shown. The Imperium became a theocratic nightmare not because the Emperor planned it that way, but because the heresy shattered everything the Emperor had built, and the survivors could not hold it together without him. Horus was being shown the consequences of his own future actions, and being told they were the Emperor's fault. And Horus, wounded and desperate and already bitter from being left behind, believed them. He emerged from the temple on the 9th day, apparently healed. The sons of Horus celebrated. The crisis was over. Their Primarch had returned to them. None of them realized that the man who walked out of that temple was not the same man who had been carried in. The seeds of corruption and treason had been planted deep in his heart, and they would grow until they consumed everything. From that moment on, Horus began to turn. He renamed his legion the Sons of Horus. He started reaching out to his brothers, carefully feeling out which of them might be persuaded to join a rebellion against the Emperor. He found fertile ground in the bitterness of Perturabo, who resented being given the most thankless assignments. He found it in the rage of Angron, who had been ripped away from his gladiator family and never forgiven the Emperor for it. He found it in the pride of Fulgrim, who was already being whispered to by a demon in his sword. He found it in the resentment of Mortarion, who hated the warp and yet was being led toward it by his own first captain. Erebus had already secured the word-bearers and their Primarch Lorgar. Conrad Curzay of the Night Lords was already half-mad with visions of his own death, and the Alpha Legion had their own mysterious reasons for choosing Horus's side, reasons that we will discuss at the very end of this list. The Great Crusade, that magnificent project to unite humanity under one banner, was about to become the bloodiest civil war the galaxy had ever seen. All because the Emperor's most trusted son could not bear to be left behind. All because a father did not explain himself to his children. All because a chaplain with a stolen sword and a stolen faith knew exactly which wounds to press. The Horus heresy lasted approximately 7 to 10 years. It killed trillions. It shattered the Space Marine legions, destroyed whole worlds, and ended with Horus dead at the Emperor's feet aboard his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. The Emperor struck down his most beloved son, but only after Horus had already killed Sanguinius, the Angel of Baal. The one Primarch that even Horus himself had once said should have been War Master instead of him. The Emperor was mortally wounded in the process and had to be interred on the Golden Throne, a cybernetic life support system that kept him alive but no longer able to actively lead his people. The Imperium survived, but it was broken, and it has been slowly decaying for 10,000 years, exactly as the Chaos Gods showed Horus it would. The cruelest irony of the entire heresy is that by trying to prevent the dark future, he was shown Horus was the one who made it happen. He created the very thing he was trying to stop, and the galaxy has been paying for it ever since. Number 2. Fulgrim, killing Ferrus Manus. The closest brothers among the Primarchs, one took the other's head. Among the 20 Primarchs, friendships were rare. Most of them existed in a complicated web of rivalries, grudging respect, and barely concealed resentment. Alliances of convenience were common. Mutual admiration existed in some cases, but genuine, deep, emotional friendship was something that very few of them managed to build. The closest thing the Primarchs had to a true brotherhood, the kind of bond where two people understand each other completely and accept each other's flaws, existed between two men who could not have been more different on the surface. Fulgrim, the Primarch of the Emperor's children, was a perfectionist and an artist. He had grown up on the dying industrial world of Kamos, where he had single-handedly transformed a crumbling society into a thriving renaissance. He valued beauty, efficiency, and the relentless pursuit of excellence in all things. His legion fought with surgical precision, aiming for the perfect victory, with the absolute minimum losses every time. He was charming, elegant, and driven by a deep, almost desperate need to prove that he and his sons were the best the Imperium had to offer. When Fulgrim took a world, he did it with style. When his legion fought, they fought like artists painting with blood and bolt shells. Ferrus Manus, the Primarch of the Iron Hands, was his opposite in almost every way. He was stern, practical, and obsessed with strength and function. He had grown up alone in the wilderness of Medusa, a dying industrial world covered in unstable terrain and discarded machinery. He had fought a biomechanical monster and drowned it in lava, and the creature's living metal had fused to his arms, giving him the hands that would become his name. He saw weakness as something to be identified and removed, often literally, with his Marines making extensive use of bionic replacements for damaged limbs. He was blunt where Fulgrim was eloquent. He was pragmatic where Fulgrim was idealistic. He spent his time in his forge or his planning rooms, rarely socializing. And his idea of a good conversation was discussing the tensile strength of a new alloy. And yet these two became the closest friends among all the Primarchs. The foundation of their bond was a shared love of craftsmanship. Both Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus were master smiths, though they approached the art from completely different angles. Fulgrim pursued perfection through beauty and artistry. A weapon he made would be gorgeous to look at, balanced to the gram, decorated with intricate designs. Ferrus pursued perfection through function and raw power. A weapon he made would be brutally effective, designed to destroy whatever it hit with maximum efficiency, with no concern for how it looked. They complemented each other perfectly. Each one saw in the other a reflection of the parts of themselves they were missing. The ultimate expression of their friendship came when they forged weapons for each other. And here is where the genius of their bond shows, because each brother deliberately made a weapon in the other's style, not his own. Fulgrim, the lover of beauty, crafted Forgebreaker, a massive thunderhammer of devastating power. It was a weapon of pure function, utterly unlike anything Fulgrim would normally make, built to suit the brutal fighting style of his pragmatic brother. Ferrus, the master of function, crafted Fireblade, an elegant power sword capable of generating immense heat. It was beautiful, artistic, a work of grace, and precisely the kind of weapon that Fulgrim would have made for himself. Each brother had stepped outside his own nature to create something that honored the other. It was a gesture of understanding and love, so complete that it is still spoken of as one of the most meaningful moments between any of the Primarchs. And then chaos ruined everything. During the cleansing of the serpentine alien world of Leren, Fulgrim claimed a strange silver sword from the ruins of a Slaaneshi temple. He set aside Fireblade in favor of this newfound weapon, not realizing that it housed a powerful demon of Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess, pleasure, and obsession. The demon worked slowly and carefully. It did not try to overwhelm Fulgrim with visions of corruption or make him into a raving madman overnight. Instead, it whispered. It fed on his insecurities. It amplified his already intense drive for perfection and twisted it towards something darker. It told him he was not appreciated enough. It told him his legion deserved more glory. It pushed his pursuit of excellence from something healthy into something obsessive and self-destructive. When Horus began assembling his rebellion, he knew that Fulgrim's friendship with Ferrus Manus was a potential asset. If Fulgrim could be turned to the traitor cause, he might be able to bring Ferrus with him. 2 Primarchs for the price of 1. It was a logical plan, but it failed completely. Fulgrim went to Ferrus Manus personally aboard the Iron Hand's flagship, the Fist of Iron, to try to recruit him to Horus's cause. He laid out the case for rebellion as eloquently as he could, using all of his charm and persuasive ability to make the argument that the Emperor had betrayed the Primarchs, and that Horus offered a better path. The meeting did not go well. Ferrus Manus was so outraged by the very suggestion that his brother would betray the Emperor that he attacked Fulgrim on the spot. The Gorgon did not bend. He did not negotiate. He did not see the other side. He went to end Fulgrim right there. A brief but savage duel erupted in the Anvilarium of the Fist of Iron. Ferrus shattered Fireblade, the very sword he had given Fulgrim, breaking it with his bare metal hands. Fulgrim managed to knock Ferrus unconscious using Forgebreaker, the hammer Fulgrim had originally crafted for his brother, and fled with his Emperor's children escort. On his way out, Fulgrim's Phoenix Guard beheaded all of the Iron Hand's Morlock's Terminators, who had served as Ferrus's honor guard. The next time the 2 brothers met, each would be wielding the weapon they had originally crafted for the other. Ferrus had reforged Fireblade. Fulgrim still carried Forgebreaker, 2 weapons made in love, now carried into a battle born from hatred. It was a horrible mirror of the friendship they had once shared, and it remains one of the most symbolically powerful details in the entire heresy. The killing blow came at the Drop Site Massacre on Isstvan Five. This was the battle where the Horus heresy stopped being a political crisis and became a true, all-out civil war. Horus had arranged for 7 Space Marine legions to converge on Isstvan Five, supposedly to crush his rebellion. 3 legions, the Iron Hands under Ferrus Manus, the Salamanders under Vulcan, and the Raven Guard under Corvus Corax, formed the first wave and attacked the traitor positions in the Urgal Depression. They fought hard and pushed the traitors back, believing that 4 more legions were coming in behind them as reinforcements. But those 4 legions, the Night Lords of Conrad Curzay, the Iron Warriors of Perturabo, the Word-Bearers of Lorgar, and the Alpha Legion of Alfarius, had already secretly sworn themselves to Horus. When the first wave pushed forward and the traitors pretended to fall back, the 4 reserve legions landed in the Loyalist drop zone and opened fire on their brothers from behind. It was the most devastating ambush in the history of the Imperium. More than 9/10 of the Loyalist forces deployed to Isstvan Five were slaughtered. In the chaos of the battle, Ferrus Manus drove forward recklessly, consumed by rage at his brother's betrayal. He would not listen to the counsel of Corax and Vulcan, who urged him to fall back and regroup. He pushed ahead of his support, deep into enemy territory, desperate to reach Fulgrim and make him pay. When the second wave revealed their treachery, the Iron Hands were caught in the worst possible position, surrounded by traitors with no path of retreat or lines. The 2 brothers fought. It was a duel of such ferocity that none who witnessed it up close survived to describe exactly what happened. What we know is that Ferrus managed to disarm Fulgrim of Forgebreaker at some point during the fight, but Fulgrim drew the demon blade from Laren and struck his brother down. With a single sweep of the demon weapon, Fulgrim cut the head from the shoulders of the man who had been his closest friend in all the galaxy. For a moment, the horror of what he had done broke through the demon's influence. Fulgrim was consumed by grief. He was distraught that his closest brother was dead by his own hand, and in that moment of devastating vulnerability, the demon in the sword took full possession of his body. The brother who had exchanged gifts of craftsmanship and spent years building a genuine bond of friendship was gone. The thing that remained wearing Fulgrim's face would go on to deliver Ferrus Manus's severed head to Horus as a trophy. In the aftermath, even Horus seemed disturbed by what had happened. As the heresy dragged on and the War Master sank further into madness and chaos corruption, he mounted Ferrus Manus' skull on his command throne and began talking to it. He lamented that he had only bloody-handed tyrants, mass murderers, and daemons for his generals, instead of strategists and men of duty like Ferrus Manus. Even the greatest traitor in human history knew that he had thrown away something irreplaceable. On the other side of the betrayal, the Iron Hands never recovered. The loss of their Primarch shattered them so completely that different factions turned on each other. Some blamed the traitors. Some blamed their loyalist allies for not supporting Ferrus's charge. Some blamed Ferrus himself for letting his emotions drive him into a suicidal attack. Seeking to purge this weakness, this emotion that had gotten their father killed, the surviving Iron Hands became cold, calculating fighters who replaced more and more of their flesh with metal. They pushed away everything that made them human, convinced that the flesh was weak and that only iron could be trusted. 10,000 years later, they are still trying to cut out the grief that Fulgrim planted in their hearts on the black sands of Isstvan Five. Number 3. Erebus corrupting Lorgar. The First Chaplain manipulated his own Primarch into worshipping chaos. If Horus is the face of the heresy, then Erebus is its architect. The First Chaplain of the Word-Bearers was not just a soldier who happened to fall to chaos. He was a true believer from the very beginning, a manipulator of extraordinary patience and cold-blooded cunning, who spent decades carefully engineering the downfall of the Imperium. He stole the blade that wounded Horus. He arranged the return to Davin. He performed the rituals that sent Horus's soul into the warp. He spread the warrior lodges that became networks of corruption in legion after legion. He orchestrated the Isstvan Three atrocity that purged the loyalist elements from the traitor legions. He summoned the ruin storm that split the galaxy in two and prevented the loyalist Primarchs from reaching Terra in time. At the Battle of Calth, he brainwashed a loyalist marine into a sleeper agent meant to one day assassinate Malcador the Sigillite, the Emperor's most trusted advisor. He even manipulated the death of Argel Tal, the leader of the possessed word-bearers known as the Gal Vorbak, because he foresaw that Argel Tal would interfere with the destiny of Kharn, the World Eater who would become the Chosen of Khorne. And his greatest masterpiece of corruption was Lorgar himself. To understand why, you need to understand what Lorgar was before the fall. The Primarch of the 17th Legion was unique among his brothers. Where Horus was a general, and Ferrus was a smith, and Layman Russ was a killer, and Robout Gilliman was an administrator, Lorgar was a preacher. Faith was as fundamental to him as breathing. He was made to believe. His entire being was built around worship, devotion, and the burning need to spread his conviction to everyone he met. In the right circumstances, this could have been the Imperium's greatest strength. A Primarch who could inspire billions with the power of his words, who could make entire populations lay down their arms and join the Emperor's cause through the sheer force of his belief. Instead, it became the weapon that destroyed everything. Lorgar had been raised on the planet Colchis by a wandering priest named Kor Phaeron, who had taught him to worship the primordial truth, one of the many names for the Chaos Gods. But when the Emperor arrived and revealed himself as Lorgar's true father, the young Primarch transferred all of that religious fervor onto the Emperor himself. He worshipped the Master of Mankind as a god with the same intensity he had once given to the primordial truth. Wherever the word-bearers went, they built cathedrals to the Emperor. Every world they conquered received shrines and temples. They invented the concept of the Space Marine Chaplain, a religious leader within the legions, and this was an innovation that would eventually be adopted by every other legion. For a time, the Emperor tolerated it, but the word-bearers were slow. All that cathedral building and religious conversion meant they were conquering worlds at a fraction of the speed of the other legions. And more importantly, the Emperor despised being worshipped. His entire philosophy, the imperial truth, was built on the idea that there were no gods, that science and reason should guide humanity, and that superstition of any kind was the enemy of progress. He told Lorgar to stop worshipping him. Lorgar did not stop, so the Emperor took drastic measures. There were even rumors that he considered using the Space Wolves to destroy the Word-Bearers entirely, the way the 2nd and 11th Legions had apparently been destroyed and erased from history. But other Primarchs, likely including Magnus the Red, who had formed a close relationship with Lorgar, begged for a lighter sentence. So instead, the Emperor ordered the Ultramarines under Robout Guilliman to come to Lorgar's perfect capital city of Monarchia, the shining jewel of the word-bearer's devotion, and raze it to the ground. While Lorgar watched, while his entire legion watched, the Emperor made the word-bearers kneel in the ashes of their holiest city and repledge themselves to the imperial truth. He told Lorgar, in front of everyone, that Space Marines were for battle, not faith. It was a humiliation so total that it broke something inside the Primarch of the 17th Legion. That was the moment Lorgar shattered. His entire identity was built on worship. He needed something to believe in with all his heart and all his soul. And if the Emperor refused to be his god, then Lorgar would find gods who wanted his devotion. This is where Erebus stepped in with his whispered words and his careful manipulation. But the truth is that Erebus had been working on Lorgar for far longer than the destruction of Monarchia. Erebus and Kor Phaeron, Lorgar's old mentor from Colchis, had been secret worshippers of chaos for years, possibly decades, before the Emperor's punishment. They had been carefully guiding Lorgar, feeding his religious impulses, and preparing him for exactly this moment. When Lorgar was at his lowest, crushed by the rejection of his father, drowning in despair and fury, they came to him. They reminded him that the primordial truth, the faith he had held as a child, had always been waiting, that there were gods who would not reject his devotion, gods who craved worship, gods who would reward faith rather than punish it. And Lorgar, desperate and heartbroken and fundamentally incapable of living without something to worship, listened. What followed was a pilgrimage into the Eye of Terror, the largest open warp portal in the galaxy. There, Lorgar and his most trusted advisors witnessed the raw, terrifying, awe-inspiring power of the Chaos Gods firsthand. They saw daemons. They saw impossible things that no mortal mind was meant to comprehend. And Lorgar converted, completely, totally, without reservation. From that moment on, the word-bearers became the first legion to fall to chaos. But they were cunning about it. They did not announce their new faith. They pretended to be model imperial soldiers. They stopped building temples, at least where anyone could see. They told everyone that the lesson of Monarchia had been learned. And behind closed doors, they began planning the greatest act of treason in human history. Erebus became the engine of that plan. He reached out to other legions. He spread the warrior lodges. He stole the anatheme. He engineered the return to Davin. He whispered into the ear of the dying Horus. Every single thread of the heresy traces back to this one moment. A broken Primarch on his knees in the ashes of his holy city, and the smiling First Chaplain who told him there were better gods to serve. In the 10,000 years since, Erebus has become perhaps the most hated character in the entire Warhammer setting, not just by the characters within the story, but by the fans who read about him. Even Khan the Betrayer, one of the most blood-soaked warriors in the galaxy, nearly killed Erebus in a fit of rage after discovering that the chaplain had arranged the murder of his friend Argael Tau. The War Master Horus himself punished Erebus by flaying the tattooed skin from his skull after the chaplain made the mistake of being arrogant in front of him. Nobody likes Erebus. And that is perhaps the greatest compliment you can pay to a villain. Number 4. Typhus betraying Mortarion. The first captain secretly guided the Death Guard into Nurgle's grip. Mortarion, the Primarch of the 14th Legion, was a man defined by one thing above all else: hatred of the warp. He grew up on Barbarous, a poisonous world ruled by alien overlords who used sorcery and strange technology to dominate the human population living below the toxic fog. The higher you went into the mountains of Barbarous, the thicker the poison became. The alien warlords built their fortresses in the upper peaks, where the toxins were so thick that even Mortarion, a Primarch, could barely survive. The humans lived below, terrified and superstitious, at the mercy of creatures they could not fight and powers they could not understand. Mortarion fought his way up from nothing. He led a peasant uprising against these alien masters, teaching villagers how to fight, building crude respirators for his followers, and leading them higher and higher into the mountains to destroy the warlords one by one. He named his fighters the Death Guard, and the name stuck. He hated the alien overlords with every fiber of his being. He hated their sorcery. He hated their warp-tainted powers. He hated everything about the Imperium and the creatures that dwelled within it. This hatred was so central to his identity that it defined everything about him and his legion. He clashed with his brother Magnus the Red over the use of psychic powers, pushed aggressively for the censure of librarians at the Council of Nicaea, and generally made it known that sorcery of any kind was something he would never accept or tolerate under any circumstances. The supreme irony of Mortarion's story is that he ended up becoming a daemon prince of Nurgle, the chaos god of disease and decay, the very kind of warp-powered monstrosity he had spent his entire life fighting against. The Primarch, who defined himself by his resistance to the supernatural, was consumed by it, and the man most responsible for making that happen was not Horus, not Erebus, and not even the chaos gods themselves. It was Callus Typhon, Mortarion's own first captain, the man he trusted more than almost anyone. Typhon had been born on Barbarus, just like Mortarion. In fact, he was a half-breed, the result of one of the alien overlords taking an unhealthy liking to his human mother. For this transgression, his mother was drowned by the other villagers after she bore her hybrid offspring. This gave Typhon a connection to both the humans and the alien masters of Barbarus, and it also gave him potent psychic abilities that Mortarion, had he known the full truth, would have been horrified by. When Mortarion began his rebellion against the overlords as a young man, Typhon was the very first person he encountered. The young child helped lead the future Primarch to safety. From that moment on, the two shared a bond, forged in shared struggle and shared origins. As outsiders, even among the people of Barbarus, Typhon rose through the ranks of Mortarion's early Death Guard, proved himself in countless battles, and eventually became first captain of the Legion, the highest-ranking officer below Mortarion himself. He was his Primarch's most trusted subordinate, his closest comrade, and the entire time he was hiding psychic powers that would have gotten him killed if Mortarion ever discovered them. He suppressed these abilities, trained himself to conceal them, all while serving the Primarch, who hated psykers more than anything else in the galaxy. Then, at some point during the Great Crusade, during the Zaramund campaign, Typhon was secretly converted to the worship of chaos. According to his own account, it happened when an old woman touched his hand, and he received what he described as a revelation from the dark gods. From that day forward, Callus Typhon served Nurgle. His allegiance to chaos predated Horus's corruption. It predated Lorgar's fall. It predated the heresy itself. Typhon was a traitor before the heresy even had a name. But he did not act immediately. He had patience. He climbed. He became the most trusted officer in the Death Guard, all while secretly serving the very chaos god that Mortarion would have despised most. When the heresy finally broke out and Mortarion sided with Horus, largely out of friendship with the War Master and shared resentment of the Emperor, Typhon saw his opportunity. But he was disappointed to find that Mortarion still refused to worship any chaos god. The Primarch was fighting alongside Horus for his own reasons, not because he had given himself to the ruinous powers. For Typhon, this was not enough. When the Death Guard's fleet set out for Terra for the climactic siege, Typhon made his move. He framed the fleet's navigators, the psychics who guided ships through the warp, with fabricated evidence that they were secretly loyal to the Emperor and were agents of Malcador the Sigillite. He executed them using his grave wardens. Then he assured Mortarion that he could guide the fleet to Terra himself, using his own latent abilities. Mortarion, who had no other option, agreed. Instead of leading the Death Guard to Terra, Typhon guided the fleet directly into the heart of Nurgle's domain in the warp. The fleet became becalmed, stranded and helpless in the Imperium, surrounded by the impossible, sickening landscape of the Plague God's Garden. And then, the Destroyer Plague hit. This was a warp-born contagion of unprecedented virulence. It attacked every system of a Space Marine's enhanced biology simultaneously. The Death Guard, the most resilient warriors in the galaxy, men who had made their reputation fighting in toxic environments that would kill any other living creature, were brought low by a disease that even their superhuman constitutions could not resist. They rotted from the inside out. Their organs liquefied. Their armor began to fuse with their decaying flesh. The pain was beyond anything they had ever experienced. These were men who had walked through poison gas and survived nuclear radiation, and they were screaming. Mortarion watched his sons suffer and die around him, and he could do nothing to stop it. Typhon revealed his true allegiance and urged Mortarion to accept Nurgle's embrace. "Submit to the plague god," he said, "and the suffering would end." Mortarion was enraged. He attacked Typhon physically, striking him down with his great scythe, Silence. But the destroyer plague permeating the ship brought Typhon back to life through Nurgle's power. Mortarion then played what he thought was his trump card. He had been keeping a deformed daemon prince named Ignatius Grulgor imprisoned, and he released this creature to carry out vengeance against Typhon. Grulgor strangled the first captain to death, fulfilling an ancient oath. But Typhon came back yet again. Both the first captain and the daemon laughed as Mortarion realized that Nurgle's power was beyond anything he could fight with a scythe or a grudge, broken, desperate, watching his entire legion dying in agony around him with no way to save them. Mortarion did the one thing he had sworn he would never do in his entire existence. He surrendered to the warp. He pledged himself to Nurgle, and the pain stopped. The Death Guard were reborn as plague marines, bloated and rotting, but essentially unkillable. Their armor fused permanently with their decaying bodies. They became walking embodiments of disease and corruption. And Typhon was rewarded most of all. Grulgor's essence dissolved and merged with his body. He swelled in size. Pestilential funnels of bone burst from his flesh, and thousands of Nurgle's demon flies poured into him, gnawing him from the inside out until his rotting shell teemed with squirming, buzzing life. He became Typhus, the herald of Nurgle, the host of the Destroyer Hive. 10,000 years later, Mortarion has never forgiven Typhus, and Typhus has never forgiven Mortarion for being too proud to accept what Typhus always believed was inevitable. The two serve the same god now, but they despise each other. Their rivalry is one of the bitterest in the entire setting, a rift that will never heal. Number 5. Luther versus Lion L. Johnson. The Dark Angel's greatest hero turned on his own Primarch. Every family has its secrets. The Dark Angels have more than most. The story of Luther and the Lion is not just a betrayal. It is the original sin of the First Legion, a wound so deep that 10,000 years of obsessive secrecy and relentless hunting have not been enough to close it. Luther was a knight of Caliban, a feudal death world covered in dense, monster-haunted forests that were tainted by the proximity of the Eye of Terror. He was the greatest hero of his generation, the foremost warrior of a knightly brotherhood called the Order. His wife and daughter had died in the harsh conditions of the planet, and he had thrown himself into the life of a knight to cope with the grief. He was beloved by the people. He was respected by his peers. He was, in every sense, the champion of Caliban, and he was the man who found the lion. Deep in the deadliest, most forbidden parts of Caliban's forests, Luther discovered a wild child, a feral boy who had somehow survived a full decade alone in a place that should have killed a normal human being in days. The forests were infested with great beasts, creatures warped by the warp energies seeping through from the Eye of Terror. They were massive, dangerous, and lethal, and this child had lived among them for 10 years without any human contact, surviving on instinct and raw superhuman ability. Luther took the child in. He named him Lion L. Johnson, which meant the lion, son of the forest in the Calibanite dialect. He raised him. He taught him language and combat and the ways of chivalry and civilization. He presented the boy to the Order and helped him rise through its ranks. He was, in every way that mattered, the lion's father figure. Together, Luther and the Lion launched a campaign to cleanse Caliban of the great beasts that had terrorized its people for generations. It was a monumental undertaking. Campaign by campaign, they led the Knights of the Order into the deepest forests, slaying creatures that had been feared for centuries. The Lion grew supernaturally fast, as all Primarchs did. Within years, he had surpassed Luther in every measurable way. He was bigger, stronger, faster, smarter, more charismatic, more effective in battle. When Caliban was finally cleansed, it was the Lion who was named Supreme Grand Master of the Order, not Luther. Luther did not openly complain. But the seed of jealousy was planted. He had been the greatest hero of Caliban, and now he was second place man, who had found the lion, who had raised him from a wild animal into a warrior king, was now standing in the shadow of his own creation. When the emperor came to Caliban and took the lion to lead the First Legion, newly renamed the Dark Angels, Luther was given certain genetic and biochemical enhancements so that he could serve alongside the Space Marines. He was made the Lion's second in command, but he was never going to be a true Astartes. He was always going to be the mortal man standing next to a god, and the gap between them only grew wider with every passing year of the Great Crusade. Things got catastrophically worse when, during a campaign against the alien Saroshi, Luther discovered a bomb aboard the Dark Angel's flagship that would have killed the lion. For a brief, terrible moment, his jealousy won out. He considered letting the bomb do its work. He stood there, looking at the device that would remove the shadow that had fallen over his life, and he hesitated. But his better nature prevailed. He disarmed the bomb with the help of the librarian Zahariel, saving the lion's life. Somehow, the lion found out about Luther's moment of hesitation. The two had a falling out, and the lion sent Luther back to Caliban with a garrison force ostensibly to manage recruitment and training for the Legion. But everyone involved understood what it really was: banishment. For 50 years, Luther sat on Caliban while the lion fought across the stars, winning glory and accolades and the admiration of the Imperium. The resentment that had been a small seed grew into something monstrous. Luther dealt with rebellions on Caliban, chaos cultist infiltrations, and the discovery that the planet itself might be infested with warp taint. He became convinced that the lion had deliberately left him there as a death sentence, that Caliban would be destroyed by the Emperor once the warp contamination was discovered, and that the lion knew this and had placed Luther there to die with it. By the time the Horus heresy erupted, Luther had made his decision. He declared Caliban's independence from both the Imperium and the lion. He rallied a significant portion of the Dark Angel's garrison to his cause, killing any who refused to join him. He studied forbidden texts about the warp and learned to wield sorcerous powers that should have been beyond a mortal man. When the lion returned to Caliban after the heresy was over, expecting to find his homeworld waiting for him, he found it in open rebellion. Luther's forces opened fire on the Dark Angel's fleet as it entered orbit. The lion was stunned. Then, furious, he ordered a devastating orbital bombardment and led a ground assault. Personally, he fought his way through the ruins of his own world to the fortress monastery and found Luther waiting. They dueled. The lion was the superior warrior by far, but he could not bring himself to strike with full force against the man who had found him in the forest, who had raised him, who had given him his name and taught him what it meant to be human. Luther, empowered by the chaos energies he had been studying for decades, had no such hesitation. He sent a bolt of sorcerous energy straight into the lion, a blast that mortally wounded the Primarch. And then Luther looked at what he had done. He saw his oldest friend lying broken at his feet, struck down by his own hand, and the full weight of his betrayal crashed down on him like a collapsing mountain. Luther began to weep. Whatever chaos had promised him, whatever rage and resentment had driven him, it was not worth this. The Dark Angels captured Luther and held him prisoner in the deepest dungeon of the rock, the asteroid-sized fragment of Caliban that survived the destruction of the planet. The gods of chaos scattered Luther's followers, the fallen angels, through the warp, casting them across time and space. For 10,000 years, Luther raved and wept in his cell, claiming the lion would return to forgive him. For 10,000 years, nobody believed him. And then, in the early days of the 42nd millennium, the lion actually woke up. Number 6. Ahriman's rubric. He tried to save his brothers from mutation. He turned most of them into dust. Not every betrayal on this list was born from malice or ambition. Some of the worst damage in history was done by people who were trying to help. And no story demonstrates this more painfully than Ahriman and the rubric that bears his name. Ahriman was the chief librarian of the Thousand Sons. He was second only to his Primarch, Magnus the Red, in psychic power. He was brilliant, scholarly, deeply dedicated, and genuinely loyal to his brothers. He had already lost his twin brother Ormuzd to the flesh change, the horrifying condition that caused Thousand Sons Marines to randomly mutate into unrecognizable monsters. That loss haunted him. It drove him to find a cure at any cost. The flesh change had been temporarily stabilized by Magnus, through means that almost certainly involved a bargain with Saench. But after the heresy, after the Space Wolves burned Prospero, after the Thousand Sons fled into the Eye of Terror, the mutations came roaring back. Warriors were twisting, changing, becoming things that were no longer human. Ahriman refused to accept this fate for his legion. He gathered a cabal of the most powerful sorcerers in the Thousand Sons, and together they devised a spell of staggering ambition. They called it the rubric. The theory was that it would stabilize the gene seed of every Thousand Son, locking their physical forms in place and making them immune to mutation permanently. When the rubric was cast, the skies over the planet of the sorcerers erupted. Bolts of warp energy struck every member of the Legion. For the fewer than 100 who possessed significant psychic abilities, the spell was a blessing. Their powers were vastly amplified. But for the vast majority, the warriors who had little or no psychic gift, the rubric was annihilation. Their bodies were reduced to dust inside their power armor. The joints and seals of their suits fused shut. Whatever remained of their spirits was trapped inside, barely sentient, barely aware. These became the rubric Marines, walking suits of armor filled with dust and the echo of a soul. They could move, fight, and follow orders from nearby sorcerers. But they were no longer alive in any meaningful sense. Magnus was devastated and enraged. Only Saench's intervention saved Ahriman from immediate death. Instead, he was exiled, cast out to wander the galaxy in search of a way to undo what he had done. 10,000 years later, he is still searching. He has never succeeded. Number 7. Perturabo decimating his own legion. He killed every 10th Iron Warrior to punish loyalty he mistook for weakness. Not every betrayal is aimed outward. Perturabo, Lord of the Iron Warriors, was a genius who could understand any machine and calculate any siege. He was also petty, jealous, and self-destructive. When he first reviewed his legion's war record, he found them wanting, not because they had failed, but because they did not meet his impossible personal standards. So he ordered decimation, 1 in every 10 Marines, chosen by lottery, beaten to death by their own brothers. He did this more than once. Over the course of decades, loyal, competent warriors were murdered at random because their Primarch was disappointed in the universe and could not stop taking it out on the people who served him. This did not make the Iron Warriors better soldiers. It made them terrified. It destroyed every bond of brotherhood and turned the Legion into a machine running on fear rather than purpose. When Horus offered Perturabo a chance to fight against the Emperor, the Iron Warriors did not hesitate. They owed the Imperium nothing. Number 8. Kor Phaeron grooming Lorgar. He raised a Primarch from infancy to become a fanatic for chaos. The destruction of Monarchia and Erebus's manipulation are the visible moments of Lorgar's fall. But the roots go much further back. Kor Phaeron found the infant Lorgar on Colchis, slaughtered the nomads who had also discovered him, and spent years shaping the boy into a religious extremist devoted to the primordial truth, which was chaos under another name. He physically and mentally abused the child, ensuring total obedience. When the Emperor arrived and Lorgar transferred his worship, Kor Phaeron waited. When Monarchia fell and Lorgar's faith shattered, Kor Phaeron was ready to guide him back to the original gods. Everything about the heresy traces back to this old priest and his patient, invisible corruption of the most powerful preacher humanity ever produced. Number 9. The Soul Drinkers' excommunication. Declared traitors despite total loyalty to the Emperor. The Soul Drinkers were a Space Marine chapter who served the Emperor faithfully for thousands of years. When the Adeptus Mechanicus stole their sacred relic, the Soul Spear, during a joint operation, the chapter fought to reclaim it. The Inquisition declared them excommunicate traitorous simply for attacking another imperial institution, regardless of the circumstances. The Soul Drinkers never worshipped chaos. They never plotted against the Emperor. They were branded the worst kind of traitors for standing up for themselves against institutional theft. In the end, the surviving soul drinkers sacrificed themselves alongside the Imperial Fists to stop a chaos plot, proving their loyalty at the cost of their existence. The Imperial Fists honored them with a memorial. It was justice, but it came far too late to matter. Number 10. The Alpha Legion's double game. They betrayed either the Emperor or Chaos. 10,000 years later, nobody knows which. The Alpha Legion was approached by the Cabal, an ancient alien organization, before the heresy began. The Cabal showed them two futures. If the Emperor won, humanity would survive but decay for 10,000 years until chaos consumed everything. If Horus won, humanity would die within generations, but chaos would starve and perish without its primary food source of human emotion. The Alpha Legion chose to side with Horus, not out of loyalty to the War Master, but because they believed humanity's extinction would save the rest of the galaxy. They made the choice they thought the Emperor himself would have made. Then Horus lost, and their sacrifice accomplished nothing. Or did it? In the 10,000 years since, different Alpha Legion cells have gone in completely different directions. Some genuinely serve chaos. Others seem to actively work against it. Some refuse to worship any gods at all. When asked who they are, every single one of them still says, "I am Alpharius." Their battle cry is still for the Emperor. Whether it is a declaration of loyalty or a mocking insult depends entirely on who is saying it. The Alpha Legion is the final, most unsettling lesson of Warhammer 40,000. Sometimes, the truth is not hidden behind a lie. Sometimes the truth is that nobody knows what the truth is. Not the people living the story, not the people reading it, and certainly not the Alpha Legion themselves. So which of these betrayals hit you the hardest? Was it the fall of Horus, the beloved son who could not bear to be abandoned? The tragedy of Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus, brothers who forged weapons for each other and then used those weapons to kill each other? The quiet horror of Kor Phaeron, spending decades shaping a child into a weapon? Or the maddening puzzle of the Alpha Legion, who betrayed everyone or no one and who will never give you a straight answer? The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 is built on betrayal. Every institution, every faction, every relationship exists in the shadow of trust that was broken. The Imperium itself is a monument to the Horus heresy, a civilization that has spent 10,000 years trying to hold itself together after half of its greatest warriors turned against it. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the echoes of these betrayals are still ringing. Brothers are still fighting brothers. Loyalists are still hunting traitors. And the question that started all of this, the question of whether you can truly trust anyone in a galaxy this cruel, still does not have an answer. It probably never will.